Welcome to the Institute of Jewish Knowledge and Learning. We are delighted to be with Karen Neal, author of the book, Penninah's World, A Jewish Life in Stories. Karen Neal is a PhD and has taught storytelling studies at Florida Atlantic University for 20 years. Come meet the author and possibly the subject. And we are so privileged also to have Penninah with us today. Take it away, Karen.
Hazen, call the girl. She should come take care of Joe. We can get to the hospital. It was December 28th, 1934, a few hours before dawn. The Victorian house in New London, Connecticut, was suddenly alive with action. Dora Manchester had been waiting for this moment for 9 months, and finally it was here. The person who had been waiting almost as much, her husband, Hazen Samuel Manchester, ran to the telephone. He picked it up and he dialed the number of the Russian Orthodox neighbor, Elizabeth, who was used to taking care of their son, Joe, whenever they needed to leave the house. Elizabeth knew that she was going to get that call any day. She picked up right away, and one of the first things she said was, "Reverend," she called him Reverend, "Reverend, I just need to ask you, is Joe asleep?" Well, to that, Samuel smiled, because he knew his son, his firstborn, the love of his life, was, shall we say, a bit of a handful. And he said, "Yes, Elizabeth, actually, he's asleep. Come right over." So while he waited for Elizabeth, he paced the floor of his living room, and he thought, actually, Joseph was not his firstborn. He had 5 grown children from his first marriage. He was a widower at age 50. He was expecting his second child from his second wife. He thought about how he had met the beautiful Dora Markman at a wedding he just happened to be conducting at the last minute 5 years before. He had seen the dark-eyed beauty with the gold hoops in her ears, and he was absolutely thunderstruck. Within 24 hours, he had written her a letter telling her he blessed the day, or rather the evening, when they met, when they made the introductions, and soon after, they were married. As he paced the floor, waiting, he thought about his parents. They were both long gone now. His father was, like him, a cantor, rabbi, moil, and also shochet in Lithuania. And he thought about how proud his father had been of him, how his father would write him letters, write him these wonderful honorifics, a magnificent cantor and honored scholarly rabbi, and all of these words that he would put before he would put his son's name, as they used to do. But he'd never, ever expected his father would do it to him, would honor him as much. He thought about the walks they would take by the Nieman River on Shabbos. He thought about his mother, Pearl, and the little notes she would write at the bottom of the letters to him. He thought about how they never met Joe, how they would never meet this new child, how they had never met his new beautiful wife, the mother of not one, but almost 2 of his children. There was a knock on the door. He ran over practically to the front door, opened it up, and there was young Elizabeth, who walked in, wished him congratulations a little bit early, and said, "I'll be here until you don't need me anymore, Reverend. I'll be here and I'll take care of everything." He said, "Elizabeth, I'd like to show you something." She sat down on the couch and he strode over to the bookcase. He reached up for the Tanakh. He opened it to a well-thumbed page and he pointed to a word in English. He said, you see that word? If I have a little girl, I'm going to call you up and I'm going to ask you to spell that word. You think you can do that? I've got a slip of paper right here marking the place. Now, between you and me, I don't know why he didn't write it down and put it in his pocket, but it would have ruined the story altogether. So she said, yes, Reverend, absolutely. Dora came down. She took one look at Elizabeth and she said, Gotcha, Duncan. Elizabeth, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much. And the two took a suitcase and walked out the door. Joe never woke up, Gotcha, Duncan. And her grandmother, Doris' mother, was upstairs waiting. At some time, maybe an hour, few hours later, the telephone rang. Elizabeth, who had just been dozing a little bit, reached over, picked it up, and said hello. It was cousin Manchester. He said, Elizabeth, will you go get the book and read me the name? Oh, you had a daughter. Oh, how wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank God. Will you read me the name and spell the name? She opened up the book. She drew her fingers down the page. She came to the English name and she read Penninah. He wrote it down and he said, thank you. Can you tell me, Reverend, I just have a question. What does the name mean? Does it have a meaning? Oh, it certainly does, he said. The meaning is pearl. And that's the name in Hebrew of our little girl. Joe was named after my father, and Penninah is named after my mother, whose name was Peril, which is pearl in Yiddish. And Penninah's middle name is going to be Pearl. Elizabeth thought for a moment, and Cantor Manchester could hear her breathing on the phone. And then she said in a small voice, you must miss your parents very much, Reverend. And he took a breath. More than you know, Elizabeth, more than you know. And that's the first story of Penninah's world that I called The Pearl. Well, I have never told that story in front of Penninah Schram. And if you heard me hesitate a little bit, it was because this is the first time I've told it in front of her. This book is absolutely, I'd like to say this about all my books, but I really can't. This one was a true labor of love and a true honor to do. It was what I did during my pandemic non-vacation. It is called Penninah's World, Jewish Life and Stories. You're looking at it, I think, backwards here, but I know you've got, oh no, you're looking at it forwards. But I know you've got the book cover, I know was sent to you. And I just wanted to begin, and there will be plenty of time for you to make comments and questions, and I would love to hear from you. I'd like to begin with something I put in the introduction to the book, which is, why did I write this book? And I met Penninah 20-something years ago, about 25 years ago. I met her as fellow members of the National Storytelling Network. I knew about her. She was a featured storyteller at the International Storytelling Center's National Storytelling Festival in Tennessee. She was already a world-renowned storyteller of Jewish folklore, and she was already a world-renowned professor and folklorist herself, author of many books. I needed for my dissertation committee a storyteller, a professional storyteller. I had academics, I had all kinds of people who were very well versed in other aspects of what I was studying, but I wanted an academic storyteller on my committee. I had never spoken to Penninah before, but I knew that she was an extremely honored person, extremely well-versed in part of my subject, actually pretty much all of my subject. And I wanted her to work with me because she was the number one person I could turn to. She said yes, like that. Now, this was somebody, I think I can say your age, Penninah. She was already in her 60s at the time, a time when many people retire or many people think about slowing down. And Penninah was just getting started. She was just revving up. And to be the fourth person in a dissertation committee was really a job. And I had to fly. Not only did she have to read my book and give me technique tips, but she also had to be flown down to Florida to listen to my oral presentation, and to, at least I could take her out to dinner when we celebrated that I had passed the orals. But it was expecting a lot from her, and I was very grateful. But that's not why I wrote this book. And I did not write this book because of all the honors and because of how well-known she is and because of how respected and because somebody else was going to beat me to it and I wanted to be the one because I knew her and loved her and felt that I was the one to do it. I wrote this book because Penninah and I think very much alike about at least one thing. Well, maybe two. We share the same taste in clothing, I have to admit. But besides that, we both understand, we both feel in our neshama that storytelling is not only the way that it connects, not only something that connects individuals, not only a way for us to understand each other, but a way for us to understand where we came from as a people and where we're going. A way to understand ourselves personally, ourselves in relation to others, and ourselves as members of a community and of a people. Now, when I spoke about Jewish storytelling to this group a few months ago, I talked a lot about this as well, and several of the same people are in the group today. But for those of you who are not, so many people, when they hear their kids are taking a storytelling class in college, will raise their hands, either partly in jest or more than partly in jest, and say, what, this is what I pay my money for? This is what my kids are learning? Well, we know as Jews how important, and as intelligent people, how important storytelling is as the underpinning to human civilization. We may not know the term, but we know that we are homo narrans, as Walter Fisher, the great communication scholar, called us. We are this storytelling animal. We experience life as an overarching story and as a series of stories. We know that we learn better, we heal better, actually research has shown, we remember better, we age better, we practically do everything better through story. And so I do not purport, particularly in this age of truthiness and fake news, I do not purport to be a historian. I do not purport even to be a journalist, in what I do. What I do is recognize that people are not going to remember, bear with me a minute, this is a metaphor, that people are not going to remember how many buffalo were slayed during the hunt, whether it was 10, 11, or 9. What they're going to remember is the bravery of the hunter. Whatever the exact words Mrs. Manchester said to her husband, this story, which incidentally Penninah was told by Elizabeth years later, this story stands as truth. It is capital T truth as opposed to small t truth, but it is the truth of human experience and of Penninah's experience. This is a very unusual biography. I call it bio-storying. I took Penninah's life based on the interviews that we had, and Penninah, poor thing, must have gone over her life. I mean, I would think even you were sick of your life at the end of this, going over it over and over and over it, over for me. Only I wasn't sick of your life, going over and over it and correcting things when I would show her the manuscript. No, you didn't understand this, or no, this is, or expanding on things. And I did a lot of side research. For example, she grew up in New London, Connecticut. She would say the downtown was beautiful. So I would research the downtown. God bless the internet. And all the things that were so hard for writers to do so easily 30, 40 years ago, as Penninah knows very well, were so much easier for me to do today. So I filled in, but I looked for areas of story, areas of entry. Penninah did not tell me so many stories from her life. What she did tell me, I will say, is some of her wonderful signature folk tales, which are interspersed throughout the book. So a folk tale would be a way, putting that in the book is a way of, again, connecting us to the subject of Jewish stories and to what Penninah's oeuvre is, but also a way of getting and emphasizing this is about a different kind of truth than journalistic truth or historical truth. So yes, Penninah approved every word that was in this book, virtually, let's say 98% of the words. I did color a few things after the last draft that she saw, but she saw several drafts of it. I made sure she was comfortable with the way I characterized her family and her work and the people she met along the way. And it was an incredible labor of love, as I say, but it was also very much in keeping with my work as a public community storyteller. I do a lot of storytelling on stage, but I am not the kind of performer Penninah is. I am not a top flight festival performer. What I'm most interested in, as an academic, what my area of interest is community storytelling. So for example, tonight at 5 o'clock, and I know I promoted this for you when I was doing the class. Tonight at 5 o'clock, I have a storytelling slam going on Zoom. And if you're interested, I will give you the information. That slam is different from the Moth, is different from Mass Mouth, is different from slams all over the country. And I believe there are several beyond this country. Why? Because I don't ask for performance. I don't ask for perfection, as someone was talking about before. I ask for people to show up, for people to look other people in the eyes and tell their story, for us to build community, even if it's a Zoom community, to build community by looking at each other in the eyes and not by giving our resumes, as so many people do, I find, even face to face, not by even talking about a third subject, but by saying, this is the world as I saw it, shaped, not just raw experience, but shaped. This is the world as I saw it. I'm going to be your guide. Take a journey with me through my world. And I firmly believe and hope that if people who are not Jewish, I will talk about what a slam is in a second. Thank you for asking. I hope that non-Jews will also read this book and come to understand a little bit about Jews and about storytelling through taking a walk through Penninah's world. SLAM is not an acronym, although it would be a great acronym. That is such a great idea. I've got to come up with one. SLAM started about more or less 30 years ago, I believe, with a novelist. His last name is Green. I have a block against his full name. I've looked it up 27 times and forget it. In New York, I believe it was that where it definitely was where they started the first storytelling slam. But I think he was sitting around his porch in Georgia or somewhere else and sitting telling stories with friends and life stories, just things that had happened to them one evening. And there was a bare bulb and a moth was just twittering around the bulb. And they had such a wonderful time. They invited more people next time. There were 80 people on this porch. They decided to have a friendly competition So unlike a storytelling circle, this is a competition. There were already poetry slams in the world going around. They have been since, I believe, the 70s, where people prepare their poems and read or memorize and recite their poems. A storytelling slam is also a friendly competition, but it's with true personal stories. And most of the slams, if you hear this beautiful stuff on the radio for the Moth radio hour on WLRN or any other public radio station, they have coached, they have auditioned, they have, I don't know if they edit, but they have made this, because these are live, but they have made this the most perfect, well-honed performance they could. And people pay to go to these performances. I've gone to the Moth in New York and in Miami several times. What I do is the opposite. I don't have the audience pay. I used to, when we did it live, I'd have the storytellers pay, chip in for the prize. We're going to go back to live in person at the Boca Raton Public Library in January. And then they will be live. People will not have to pay, whether they are audience or whether they are storytellers. But the idea is connection. The idea is not fantastic entertainment of a honed professional quality. It is the pleasure that comes from people sharing stories with other people. And so often I will get people say, oh, I just heard an immigrant story. I've got an immigrant story of my own. And they'll come up and tell their story. And the idea, again, is a little different than what Penninah does as a performer, or even what I do as a performer. But it is still celebrating the human skill and birthright that is storytelling, the legacy that is storytelling. Same thing with what I do with the public storyteller on public radio. Same thing. We edit so that these things don't go on and on and on. And if somebody makes a mistake, we fix it. But I will put my, this is really not about that, other than that I am talking about how this fits in with what I do. But I will put to everyone in the meeting my email, so you'll have it. The same thing with the public storyteller. People record themselves with a story that they lived in South Florida. It's on WLRN 91.3 FM today at 4 o'clock, every week at 4 o'clock. If you're interested, and if you want more information, just let me know. But I want to get back to the book, and I want to be sure that I make the point that although Penninah and I are different in many ways, we shared enough similarities that I felt that I was the person to do justice to her. And I hope that I have done justice to her in this book. We worked together very closely to decide what the photographs were. Penninah chose a dozen and a half or so photographs from her family and sent me what she liked, and a few more than we needed. And I chose which ones I thought were the best. There are some gorgeous, amazing photographs in here. And don't forget, by the way, if you are interested, don't pay full price for the book. Kim can allow you to help you get it for 30% off. But we worked together to make sure that she was comfortable with what I did. So yes, I wrote this, I shaped it, but unlike, thank you, George Dawes Green. Thank you so much, Robin. I knew you'd come through. So we wanted to be sure that this was biography, but biography with a twist. And I will say, and I wouldn't say this if Penninah weren't sitting here, but I will say this, it was a challenge for both of us, because it is very rare that a biographer works with a living subject. In fact, I can't think of many times that this has happened. And so obviously Penninah had different approaches to things than I did. And we had a little bit of jostling here and there, but we remained deeply, deeply fond of each other and close colleagues. But it was a balancing act. There's no doubt about it, because who owns a life? As simple as that. Who owns the the story of a life? Well, it's a very interesting point. So I decided that in many, many ways, Penninah did as well, and should reap the benefits from this book as well, because after all, where would I be without her in more ways than one? So I want to take a pause here before I get into something else. Does anybody have a comment or a question that either to ask out loud or to put in chat, other than what I've heard so far? So just to give you a little more information about Penninah, and you can jump in anytime. As we know, Penninah was born December 28th, 1934, which makes her about 29 by my count, because I know her so well. And she worked for 45 years, give or take, as a professor of speech and theater at Stern College, which is the women's division or the sister college to Yeshiva University in New York. She has an extensive background as a performer, both in college performances, and she produced shows. In fact, there are a lot of walk-in parts. I'm going to interrupt my biography for a moment to say there are a lot of walk-on parts by people even better known than Penninah Schram. And one of them is Isaac Bashevis Singer. And Penninah's theater company, with her dear friend from college, was the first to produce one of Singer's stories as a play. They secured the rights and produced it as a play in the 60s. And it was really quite something. She was a friend of Isaac Bashevis Singer, a friend, not just an acquaintance, a friend of Elie Wiesel, who asked her to not fill in for her as she thought, and you will read that in the book, but actually teach for him, not fill in for him, but actually teach for him while he was in the room sitting next to her. If I am nervous to doing this in front of Penninah, you can imagine how she felt in front of Elie Wiesel. And she taught a class for him. And I have been told by other professors that her books are used in their classrooms. Her folklore is used in her classrooms. And so her books as well are, and her academia is every bit, her scholarship is every bit as well known and as respected as is her performance work is too. So just to get back to the people she knew, she has a wonderful story about Jeff Goldblum in the book. And she has a lovely story about Molly Picon, the Yiddish theater star. And she really, and one of my favorites is the young student. I don't name him till the end, but the young student who came in, not at Stern, who came in to meet with her in her office a couple of times before she taught at Stern, and when she taught at a Catholic college. And he would talk to her about his work, and he was very shy, and she had him bring in his guitar, and she told him, well, you know, you can sing very well. I think you can speak the way you sing. And they had lovely long conversations. And years later, not so many years later, she took her daughter to see him perform in New York, outside in New York, Lincoln Center, I believe it was, around Lincoln Center, right? And he gets on the stage, the riser. He looks over the crowd, he sees her, and he says, Professor Schram. And her daughter plots, turns to her and says, Mom, Don McLean knows you. So of all the Jewish superstars she knows, she also knows Don McLean, a not so Jewish superstar at the time. So in fact, I think he used to call her American Pie. Didn't he used to call you that, Penninah? Wasn't that his nickname for it? No, just kidding, just kidding. So I'd like to read you something else from the book. And this is a poem that was dedicated to Penninah by Peretz Kaminsky. And Penninah can more accurately describe who he was. He was a great Yiddishist, and we got permission from his son, Mark Kaminsky, to reprint this book, this poem that he wrote for her. It is written in a very, the arrangement of the words is very interesting on the page, but the words are lovely too. And he wrote this in her honor. He called it, coincidentally, The Storyteller. Talk, tell, use words. You tell stories with your eyes, with your shoulders, your hands. You tell with your silences, tell without telling in the space between words. You tell about madness, but you are not mad, and about rage, but you are not angry, and about dying as though death is a story. We listen to the words, to the silences, listen to your voice and look at your face, at your moving lips, at your eyes opening and closing. Unnumbered whispers, countless voices whispering with eyes closed, with lips moving, in cadences, in rhythmic repetitions, in arpeggios, flowing softly, opening meaning. The words and the whispers become prayers, become stories, become silence. There is imagination to fly in. There is truth to find. There are definitions to specify. There is terror to live through. There are stories to shape. There are dead to remember. There is the phoenix rising on the smoke, from the ashes, from the sparks, in the story. The listeners become the phoenix with new hands and feet, with new legs and arms, with the entire catalog of bones and functions that walk across the spaces and the times of memory, become fertile once again. And the storyteller sings and sighs. The sand of time is flowing out of the mysteries we sing about. After silences and searches, the storyteller sings and gels. The footprints that we leave behind become the treasures others find. We make rituals of words. There is imagination. There is truth. There are definitions. There is terror. There are the dead. There is meaning. And there is the notion that only the homeless can cherish, that our footprints sink into an ocean of sand and that they never will perish. You talk, tell, use words, eyes. You tell with your eyes, with your shoulders, your hands, and with your silences. Now, the best storytellers use silence eloquently. But another reason I wrote this book was because professional storytellers know that silence needs to come to an end. Sometimes amateur storytellers, the rest of the world who doesn't make a living through storytelling, forgets how valuable their stories are as well. So this book is not only an homage to Penninah, it is not only a capturing of this incredible life and career and the work that she did, but it is also an exhortation. Because we, whether we're Jews or non-Jews, whether we live in Boca Raton or Vienna or New York City or some of the other places people on this call live, we must recognize that our stories are every bit as meaningful. We may not have the same performance skills. We may not have the ability to overcome our performance anxiety, particularly in front of our mentors. We may not feel that we have a story that is worth making into a major motion picture. But what we do have is stories that are worth telling. I am assigning this book this fall to my students at Florida Atlantic University who are taking a course called Women and Storytelling. And I want them to recognize first and foremost, that here is a great woman storyteller and somebody who stood as a mother and as a leader to many of the rest of us, but also that their stories matter just as much. Again, raw experience may or may not be interesting to listen to, but the shaping that comes with story takes raw experience, which is what oral history is, and highlights, doesn't give it meaning, but highlights the meaning in it. And I hope very much that I've been able to do that with the stories that I have shaped from Penninah's interviews. Any comments or questions before I go on? Okay, that's fine, but I'd also love to hear a story from any of you if you've got one. Remember, your stories matter, and that's what I do. That's what I'm all about. So we'd love to hear yours as well. I wanted to read you the last chapter of the book. I told you the first one. And the book takes us through her relationship with her mother, her relationship with her father, her relationship meeting her first husband, and going to France, and becoming a storyteller and becoming an academic, and all the other things that she's done, having children. There were so many aspects of Penninah's life we just didn't have space for, or that just didn't pertain, because this was specifically a book about what shaped her as a woman and as a storyteller. But I did the best I could. And I'd like to pretty much end with chapter 25, Ever After. The wind had whipped up unexpectedly that morning, and for once, Penninah hadn't dressed for the weather. Making her way to the subway at West 86th Street, she hugged her arms for warmth, struggling to balance the strap of her big leather bag more securely on her shoulder. Twice, she nearly turned back for her heavier coat, but she chided herself. The station was just a block and a half from her apartment. Outside Penn Station, she stood shivering for 5 minutes until the crosstown bus stopped at the corner of West 34th Street and 7th Avenue. She preferred the bus to the train. She was always interested in watching the people sprinting down the busy streets, so intent on arriving at their myriad destinations. Relationships, dreams, responsibilities, these, she knew, are the stuff of life. At Lexington Avenue, she made her way to the front of the bus, stepped onto the sidewalk, and walked 1 block to the Stern building on West 35th. She called out a hearty hello to the security guards at the downstairs elevators and to the secretary in the department office. By the time she reached her office, she was thoroughly chilled. She dropped her bag on her desk and went in search of the day's 3rd cup of coffee. Returning to her office from the cafeteria, she lifted the styrofoam cup to her lips and sipped the scalding liquid. She closed her eyes and a thought came to her, not for the first time. I am in my 70s. Maybe I should retire and make room for a younger person to take my place. As if to try out the idea, she stood up and carried the mug 2 doors down to her empty classroom. What if today were my last day teaching here? The sudden rush of anxiety at the thought was nearly overpowering. She considered sitting down, but didn't want an early arriving student to find her in that state. Instead, she returned to her office and shut the door for a few minutes until she had composed herself. 1 more year, she whispered to the bookcase, the computer monitor, the graded papers. I love it so much, and I know I'm still doing what I came here for. Then, in 2014, the administration made the proverbial offer that was too good to refuse. They were giving new retirees extra money and extra medical insurance. She was going to be 80 in December. There was no good reason she could think of not to take it. Penninah wasn't the sole honoree at the retirement party. A couple of other faculty members in their 70s and 80s also took advantage of the generous offer. The event was held in a large common room in one of the apartment houses that Yeshiva University used as dorms. Attending with her son, daughter-in-law, and 3-year-old grandson, she felt tremendous nachas as she introduced them to her colleagues. By the way, there's a glossary of Yiddish and Hebrew terms in this. After the hors d'oeuvres and drinks were passed around, Dean Bacon said a few words in honor of the 3 faculty members who were being celebrated, then invited each of the honorees to speak. When it was Penninah's turn, she prayed that she would get through her 10 minutes without tears. When my beloved husband Irv died in the winter of 1967, she said, I didn't want to go anywhere. That fall, I began teaching at Iona College in New Rochelle, and it was all I could do to go to work, take care of my 2 children, and put one foot in front of the other. She paused. I can do this. Then I received a wedding invitation. You know how much a new widow looks forward to attending a wedding? The crowd nodded. Several people clicked their tongues in sympathy. I didn't want to go in the worst way, but I told myself, this is a mitzvah, celebrating the wedding of 2 young people. You need to be there. And that's where I met Dr. Abraham Tauber at the wedding through a mutual friend. I love, by the way, the fact that her parents met at a wedding and that she met at Stern at a wedding. It's a beautiful, the symmetry between the first chapter and the last chapter are beautiful, if I do say so myself. He set up an interview with Dean Isaac Bacon. We had a wonderful interview. However, I wanted to remain at Iona a second year. Then Dr. Tauber set up an appointment for me to meet Dean Mirsky, and the rest is history. When I became a faculty member at Stern College in 1969, Dr. Tauber's daughter, June Golden, was my colleague and office mate, and we became good friends. When Karen Bacon became dean in 1977, she was very supportive of my storytelling course and gave us the support to organize 3 storytelling festivals, co-sponsored with the 92nd Street Wise Jewish Storytelling Center. I've been grateful to her enthusiasm and support all these years. Now, 45 years later, I am leaving Stern. I ask myself, where did the time go? And more importantly, what would I be doing if I hadn't performed that mitzvah? Thank you, all of you, for celebrating us elders today. I know I speak for the other retirees when I say it was our sincere honor to work here. As the start of the next semester approached, Penninah was keenly aware of the calendar. The feeling of not having to go to work that first morning was strange. Throughout the first year of her retirement, she was in touch with the college quite a bit, but each year a little less. She presented annual workshops for the honors education majors, after which she would step into the dean's office to say hello to Dean Bacon, to the secretaries who had been so good to her, to some of the others in the administrative office suite, to the librarians whom she always acknowledged for their assistance in her books. Every time she visited, she was greeted with smiles and hugs. She was delighted, even when the security guard still remembered her when she stopped for a chat. But there was so much storytelling work to do, so many invitations and requests to co-author, to contribute, to edit, a festschrift, essays by a number of scholars written about her work in her honor, teaching in the new Magid Educator training program to support new Jewish storytellers, Cage and New Cage conferences, either in person or virtually, requests from former students or rabbis or casual acquaintances for help locating a particular story, invitations to teach a class from one of the faculty members of the Azrieli Graduate School of Jewish Education and Administration at Yeshiva University. At the end of some days, that was exhausting just reading it. At the end of some days, her fingers rested stiffly on her keyboard, but still she answered the mail, picked up the telephone, took the subway or the plane to perform, teach, present. She continued to attend her beloved synagogue, B'nai Jeshurun, BJ, some of you will know. She increased her schedule of trips to Israel. She spoke on the telephone to friends and family every day. Sometimes she called her own Channing Street neighbor, Catherine, her mind now too far gone to remember how they used to call themselves Linda and Lorraine when they played school. Sorry, that part always tricks me up. And far more often than she would ever expect, somebody who had seen her teacher perform 20, 30 years earlier would look her up and ask her a question, invite her to present a program, or just want to bask in her aura. Truly. One day, she received an email from a young rabbi in Warsaw asking her to recommend some of her stories for a series he planned to translate and record for Jewish children. She suggested half a dozen from her book, The Hungry Clothes, including the popular Solomon story, This Too Shall Pass, and a lesser known tale called Remember. Remember that, remember. Another day, it was a letter from a man in Milwaukee who wanted to hire her after a coworker told her about her performance from 25 years earlier. A woman she had met 30 years earlier in Montreal wrote for permission to tell a story of hers. And there is more. There are her children, Rebecca and Mordechai. Rebecca came to New York from Israel to stay with her while she recovered from her each hip replacement. There are the grandchildren, Dorala, Aaron and Ilan in Israel, Sahi and Simcha in the States. There is an apartment and storage compartment full of memories of her father's love letters to her mother, photos of her family, and hundreds of books. I think it's really thousands. A stack of letters to her from her father and one from her mother. A professional photograph of her father in cantor's garb and a few of her mother when she was young. Her parents' framed wedding portrait, her mother's beads and clothing, the book of leaves Penninah made as a child. There's a chapter on that. Classical music on the piano. There's a chapter on that. The Fu Manchu costume she wore in a school play. Her father's menorah from Lithuania with a bullet casing serving as a substitute shamash in place of the original, which had long since broken off. The reel-to-reel recording of her first wedding. The Teacher of the Year plaque from her students on which they had engraved the words, "Once upon a time, there was a teacher." She was dearly beloved by all her students. She was as wise as she was beautiful. There was an outstanding senior faculty plaque from the college and too many storytelling awards to count. Thank you notes from lawyers writing that they still used what they learned in her class. A note from her beloved friend and colleague, Cherie Caro Schwartz, about the New Cage Renewing Initiative for Storytelling Education Program, which she had created in Penninah's honor. The cut crystal Victorian lamp with the domed top that had sat on her parents' dining room table, reposing now on her mother's old Singer sewing machine. An Edison wind-up photograph with records half an inch thick, her father's book, Kol Rinav Tefillah, a set of sterling silverware that her mother had brought from Russia, a pile of rubles, her parents' passports and important papers, a box of 3x5 index cards, completely covered in Yiddish on both sides, which were her father's notes for his Divrei Torah, his sermons when he took the role of rabbi in his shul all those decades before. And by the way, this is a very little apartment. There is also the legacy that no visitor can see. The love of Judaism, of stories, of excellence that her parents instilled in her and that has served her for 86 years. She is a pomegranate, brimming with the seeds of wisdom and everyone she has ever known and loved. And pomegranate is a recurring motif in her stories. And then I leave a space and then I tell a final story from her signature collection. In a certain kingdom, the people maintained an unusual tradition for choosing a king when the old one died. The dead king's advisors released the bird of happiness. It flew around the country's men, and whomever it sat on was crowned king. I think we should maybe think about adopting that in our country, except I think they should include women as well. It so happened that a king died and the ritual was performed as usual. This time, to the amusement and horror of the assembly, the bird alighted on the head of the court jester. "You must put away your cap of bells, your drum, and your foolish clothing," the advisors told him. "Now that you are king, you must wear the crown and these robes. And above all, you must remember that you are now the king and not the jester." The first thing the new king did was to arrange for a small shack to be built near the palace. One day, the people saw him disappear into the shack with his old jester's cap, drum, and clothing. After a while, he emerged, locked the door, and returned to the palace. This went on from time to time till the advisors started to whisper. Finally, the bravest of them approached him and asked, "Sire, what is it that you do in that shack?" "I look at my jester's costume," he said. "To be a good king, I must always remember where I came from. I must remember where I came from and who I am." And I end the book with that story of Penninah's for obvious reason, because that is a huge part of what this book is about. I also wanted to point out before I read the chat, I wanted to also point out that the book was called Penninah's World for an important reason. I thought very long and hard about what to call it. Thank you. Marilyn is showing one of Penninah's beautiful books, her first one actually. And we have a story about that as well in the book.
I'd like to say something.
But hold that thought. Let me just finish and then I'll turn it over to you. So I just wanted to make the point that I called this Penninah's World because we are all shaped by our environment, and our environment is the people around us, the community in which we grow and up in and live in, and that is the physical community and the human community. And so I wanted to make those come alive as well, not just who Penninah was, but also New York and New London and one or two other places as well. Yes, Marilyn.
I met Penninah Schram at a conference in 1992. I bought her book and she inscribed it, but I wanted to thank her for the story I read many years before, where King Solomon wore the ring, Gam Ze Ya'avar, this too shall pass. And at a time in my life when things looked very gloomy, I thought of that and it really restored my hope, my faith. And whenever I think about Penninah Schram and that story, it brings tears to my eyes. And that has been my motto all my life. Gam Ze Ya'avar, this too shall pass. It's such an inspiration. So I was most happy to hear that you were going to talk about it today. That's all I wanted to share with you, how important she was in my life.
Thank you so much. Penninah, you want to respond to that? I bet you remember Marilyn. She hasn't changed a bit.
I am so delighted. Thank you so much for that epilogue, if you will. That line has been my mantra for many, many years. And the fact that we can discover a mantra that in times of stress, of sadness, of loss, that we hold on to, that helps us go over the mountain, so to speak, to be able to see life again and live with the energy and the all that's been given to us from the people that we thank for so much. So thank you. Is that Marilyn? Yeah, thank you, Marilyn, because you have given me a gift, and to all of us, the power of stories, the importance of stories. They still work. In fact, even more so, we need these stories, whether they be life stories, folk tales, tall tales, Talmudic stories. I mean, we have a great repertoire in our Jewish oral tradition. These stories today, in spite of or because of all the social media, with the misinformation as well, right? We need the stories because even if they didn't really happen, there's truth in these stories. A story is always true. It's a different kind of way to look at those stories and to bring them into our lives. I thank you so much, and I hope that everybody will begin to retrieve stories you remembered from your parents or grandparents or babysitters, because those early formative stories are so important to understand how we were shaped and influenced into who we are today. And I want to say something to you, Karen, which I haven't had much time because we were on the phone or the emails, just dealing with a lot of things that came to reality in this book. You are a woman of wisdom, and the wisdom comes from the seat of the heart. And the heart combines, in our Judaism, the heart combines the cognitive, which you have, the scholarship, the brains, lady, and the emotions, the affective. There's no separation between the intellect and the emotions. And you have a heart that is open and generous, and it opens my heart. And I think it's opened many, many hearts just this last hour, really. And you have a beautiful neshama. The neshama is so beautiful. It would take, well, many hours, and I'm not going to go on. I want everybody to understand and know that this woman, this person is a mensch with heart and neshama.
Well, I never thought I would cut you off, Penninah, but I'm going to cut you off.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very, very much for those beautiful words, though. And Marilyn, I'm so glad you brought that up. Kim, did you have a hand?
I was going to ask if Penninah would not mind to share her reaction to being invited and to the outcome of the book. You might have answered a bit of it in your comments about what Karen brings to the world, but is there anything that you feel that you'd like to add about how it felt and the outcome?
Thank you. And by the way, thank you for being here and hearing Karen. When she first proposed the idea of a biography about 5 years before we started working on it, I said, no, why? It was like, what do you want from me? Is it worthy of being biographied? And when she showed up really at my house with a tape recorder and said, we're recording. This was just before the pandemic. And I loved actually reworking and reliving my life in a different context, not always sequential, but here, there, I would throw in. But what Barbara Meyerhoff discovered when she was interviewing the elders in Venice, California, and her book is worth getting. It's called Number Our Days, which comes from the song. But when she would ask people, tell me your story, tell me what happened to you in your life. And a woman said once, nothing happened to me, I just lived. And Barbara Meyerhoff said, well, so tell me about it. And so when you have all of these little anecdotes and moments and things that you're living through, when you see it in retrospect, these little moments and little anecdotes where we think of not or don't think much of become like a link, and they link together to create the narrative of our lives. We have all lived a worthy life to share with your close people, or this one, God willing, will go out into the world and hopefully will be read. But it is so important to tell our stories, even to ourselves, and find that hope and that strength that we need sometimes to overcome incidents and experiences. But I didn't believe that what Karen would do, and of course this was her design, composing this book in this particular way. And I'm so grateful to you, Karen. it was brilliant, and oh, talk about creativity and imagination that you have. I don't believe it, or I didn't until I actually, could hold it tactile, and I can read it and turn the pages, and I still can't believe it's real, that it's a reality. I look at it all the time.
And Angelina Jolie is playing her in the movie, by the way. We just got word.
And I say, Gott sei Dank, more than 100 times a day, rather. Baruch Hashem, thanks to God. My mama used to say it, of course, in Yiddish. Gott sei Dank.
I know that we are out of time, and I just want to be sure. Thank you so much, Penninah, for coming, and I thank all of you for coming so much. I want to remind you, please don't pay full price for the book. You can get, all you need to do is call the number on the coupon that Kim will send you or has made available to you, and you'll get 30% off. I want to be sure to thank not only Kim, not only Marcia, but above all, Barbara, for making this happen. And what would we do without the women in our lives, and some of the men as well, but this organization, and I look out at these faces, and I just am so grateful to you all for making not just this event happen, but making our scholarship and our community so strong. And I really thank you so much. We've got some wonderful comments here on chat. Be sure to take a look at them.
And if you would send to me in the email information I saw about the Boca program.
Oh, well, what I did was I put on my my email, so we don't have to, since the Zoom is, the Storytelling Slam is tonight at 5. So I've got my email here, so I can just make that really easy. People can send to me directly for the question. That may help. But also, if you're ever interested in recording a story for public radio, it's not live, don't worry. I'd love to hear your stories. And it was just such a pleasure being with you all today.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We will all stay in touch, and also thank you to Penninah for those insights as well. Look forward to more IJKL programming, and we'll see where our paths cross. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of a Sunday. Sunday.